Hello and welcome once again to the Yak, the Yards After Catch podcast, talking about wide receiver analysis. I'm Big Italy 42 here with Josh Shepardson at BChad50, and obviously you're the brains behind this article. Found all the stats, and I'm on board with all these plays. Starting at the top here, Julio Jones. I mean, you know the drill with Julio Jones before. Obviously had a down week last week. People saying he got shut down, things of that nature. He didn't get shut down. You just didn't need to use Julio Jones, and there's speculation he's not 100%. I mean, nothing saying he's not actually going to play. He's going to be fine for this week. I mean, when you're up 42-0, you don't need to force the ball to Julio Jones in any fashion. So obviously, the down week last week might just keep his ownership lower than it rightfully should be this week, and it's a fine matchup. I mean, Washington's been a little bit of a surprise on defense, but we're still talking about Julio Jones here, one of, if not the best receiver in all of football, so I'm not concerned about the matchup.
Yeah, I had to do a lot of statistical digging to come up with Julio Jones being a good play this week. The absence of D'Angelo Hall is huge for that Redskins secondary. They don't have this is an X's and O's, Jimmy's and Joe's case. They don't have the Jimmy's and Joe's to shut down Julio Jones no matter what they throw up on the whiteboard. So I love this matchup. Gotta love the rapport he has with Ryan. I love the fact that Roddy White's been a nothing this year. That certainly helps Julio Jones's case. Love the game plans that are just absolutely geared towards getting Jones the football as much as he can humanly take it. And I think he's going to have a huge week. And as you said, coming off of a down week, maybe that suppresses his ownership just a touch, and that's always a plus.
Yeah. Anytime you can get him at lower than ridiculous numbers.
Yes.
We've seen him 30-35% on GPPs multiple times this year, so I like that. Next up, Keenan Allen. Injuries to Malcolm Floyd. Injury to Stevie Johnson. You get Antonio Gates back, but this is a Chargers team that's facing Pittsburgh, who's not a very good secondary at all. Keenan Allen has already had a couple monster games. Even last week, I guess you could say a down week as far as volume of receptions, but still found the end zone. This is a guy that has a nice floor, aside from, the toughest of matchups. He was shut down against the Bengals, but, that was their game plan, was to take him out. Obviously now, you got to worry about Antonio Gates, and this is just a good matchup for Keenan Allen, who may see a ridiculous amount of targets in this matchup where, he's Philip Rivers' safety blanket, and, between the 20s especially, Keenan Allen going to see a ton of volume this week.
Yeah, he's one of the most targeted receivers in the league right now, but it's not just about volume either. He's been really good, really efficient, nice yards, 2.43 yards per route run according to Pro Football Focus, which is 9th among receivers who've played received 25% or more of their team's targets. So he's efficient and he's getting a ton of volume. That's a perfect combination. And the fact that the Steelers just don't have the secondary to basically combat him is another big reason for liking him. Looking at the cornerback grades at Pro Football Focus, both of the starting corners for the Steelers have negative coverage scores. They just don't have the guys to keep Keenan Allen in check. So I'm a big Allen fan this year. I think you're going to get a lot of this week, this year too, but this week especially. And I like the price points on both sides. 77's fair on FanDuel. 72 feels like a steal on DraftKings, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on board with him in all formats. The guy that I'm considering there in my cash games as well. Jeremy Maclin next up, another guy that is really starting to emerge over the past 2 weeks. 2 big games in a row. Obviously, this was the extra threat that this offense needed. And, he's been a huge boost to the entire offense and Alex Smith in particular. Now facing a Chicago team that's one of the worst defenses against the pass, and against the run in all of football. So Jeremy Maclin at his still depressed price tag, $6,000 on DraftKings, under $7,000 on FanDuel. You got to imagine, he's going to be one of the higher-owned players at wide receiver this week. But, for good reason, because it's a great matchup. And, you really think that the only reason that people would be overthinking this one was Amari Cooper kind of being somewhat of a disappointment last week despite catching a touchdown pass. But, Jeremy Maclin is an established receiver that we've seen do this for years. So I'm excited about playing Jeremy Maclin this week.
Yeah, and you have to feel more comfortable getting the Bears away from Chicago. Oakland went into Chicago last week. I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult, and obviously the odds makers do too. Huge point spread there. The Chiefs are big favorites, and the fact is they are basically a three-headed offensive monster. It's Jamal Charles, Jeremy Maclin, and Travis Kelce. And when you've got a big total like the Chiefs do, and you've got a big spread like that, only having a few mouths that are going to clearly be dominated and fed regularly. Makes it pretty easy to target a guy like Maclin. You and I talked a little bit off the cuff before the show. Really, the only other knock that we have against Maclin is the thought of playing Maclin and Charles together and spending up on both and worrying about them cannibalizing each other's production. But otherwise, you have to love Maclin. At 6,900 on FanDuel, at 6,000 on DraftKings, he's locked in with Alex Smith right now. 2 monster weeks, and any concerns about week 3 being just garbage time production against a Green Bay team that was up big, they went out the window this past week. So Maclin clearly in lock in step with Alex Smith. Love him this week, and really has nobody else other than Kelsey to challenge him in the passing game. So going to get a lot of looks against a secondary that's not good. And the Bears are just not forcing turnovers. They're not forcing sacks this year. They only have two interceptions and 6 sacks this year. And if Alex Smith is able to stay upright, which it seems like he's going to be against this Bears defense, I mean, it's a perfect matchup for him to actually continue this Maclin heater, basically.
Yeah, and like we've seen, I mean, there haven't been a lot of passes deep down the field to Maclin, but mostly for that reason, they haven't been able to protect the quarterback. So if the offensive line is able to do that this week, which they should be able to, maybe we see some extra shots down the field and some big plays from Maclin. So next guy had a couple big plays last week while his teammate was in a tough matchup there. You mentioned here more so of a DraftKings play because number 1 receiver Allen Robinson is very similarly priced on FanDuel, but Allen Hurns for the Jags, in a good matchup against Tampa Bay secondary that is just not very good at all this season. No. And really, you could take your pick with these two guys. Both guys in a good spot. Blake Bortles starting to look more comfortable there in that offense now with a running game that's starting to produce at least somewhat with TJ Yeldon there. So this is a situation where, depending on what site you're playing on, I think, and I know you agree, that both guys are good plays here.
Yeah, like both on both sites. The $1,000 difference on DraftKings really is the reason that Hurns got the nod over Robinson in here. That is a sizable cap savings. Just $200 cheaper than Robinson on FanDuel, so I would lean Robinson's way just because he has gotten more targets this year. He is coming off of a solid showing against Vontae Davis and the Colts. I mean, Vontae Davis, one of the best cover corners in the league. I don't know the exact number of snaps that Allen Robinson dealt with Vontae Davis, but he put up 80 yards receiving. That's a solid showing against one of the best corners in the league. So with a much easier assignment this week, I do think Robinson will perform very well. I think he'll close that gap between he and Hurns again, but Hurns has been rock solid all season. He's eclipsed 60 yards receiving, or reached the 60-yard receiving mark, or eclipsed it in all 4 games this year, getting targeted heavily, caught 13 balls over the last 2 weeks. He's reached the end zone in each of the last 2 weeks. Everything you could look for in a number 2, and the fact that Bortles is so willing to throw to his receivers is big. He's not checking down. This isn't a captain check down scenario where it's the backs and tight ends just accumulating volume. He's airing it out for his receivers and letting his receivers do work, and I love this matchup for Hurns.
Yeah, I'm on board with that. And then the next one's going to be interesting. We saw Vincent Jackson have a big game last week, but, I mean, the youngest or the best young cornerback in the league, and Josh Norman, I mean, he's one of the best overall now all of a sudden. Josh Norman was incredible. Had Mike Evans shut down last week. Got to imagine he would be doing the same to just about any receiver in the NFL. Yep. So going to probably be more ownership for Vincent Jackson than there rightfully should be this week. And we get Mike Evans now as the obvious number 1 against the Jacksonville team that has not been very good against the pass here this season. So Mike Evans there in a good spot against a team that's in the bottom 10 against number 1 receivers this season. So I'm not overreacting to the Vincent Jackson thing. You and I were talking about it before the show. This is the play here, not chasing the points with Vincent Jackson.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of hoping Vincent Jackson gets that lemming ownership boost that I love, especially when it's for a guy who probably shouldn't get that ownership boost. You're going to see the I joked that Maclin's going to get the lemming boost as well, but at least in Maclin's case, it's defensible. 2 big weeks. He's going to get ownership from savvy DFS owners, and he's going to get it from people chasing points. But in this case, Vincent Jackson is going to be strictly chasing points. Evans is the number 1 receiver there. Make no bones about it. And this is another situation where it's a young quarterback that I trust to throw it to his receivers. Jameis Winston, not afraid to air it out. He targeted Evans 8 times. It wasn't a productive week against Josh Norman, but he still threw it to Evans 8 times, and he threw it to Vincent Jackson a ton. Both receivers have been targeted a ton this year with Winston under center, willing to take shots down the field, and Evans is that big receiver who's a matchup nightmare, posted a monster rookie season, so we know how elite Evans is capable of being. He just hasn't. One, he wasn't healthy in week one. Now he's fully healthy. He's getting his full complement of snaps. And I have no concerns about Evans torching this Jacksonville secondary this week.
No, I don't either at all. Next up, Jordan Matthews for the Eagles, a guy who was a really popular play the first few weeks of the season, kind of fell off. Last week, we saw 3 touchdown passes for Bradford. Matthews didn't get his hand in that. But looking at this matchup here, this is the type of matchup where you can see Jordan Matthews break out and, show that he's the number one receiver that we all know he's talented enough to be. And with an offense that's finally starting to get it going, they're starting to keep Sam Bradford and their running backs to some extent upright before they at least get to the line of scrimmage. So, Jordan Matthews is a guy that's still going to see lower ownership than he should in this game. And the Eagles now with over a 27-point team total here, so Vegas expected him to score some points this weekend. He might fly under the radar more than he should.
Yeah, I mean, big team over-under total, game that should be a shootout. The game over-under total is 49.5, so you have to like the fact that the spread isn't so big that it's just going to turn into trying to salt the lead away. They're going to have to keep their pedal to the metal for the entirety of the game. And Matthews is the most targeted option in this offense. He is Bradford's favorite target, and I think the best way to beat the Saints team is to air it out against them. They rank dead last in coverage according to Pro Football Focus. They rank dead last in pass defense according to Football Outsiders. There isn't anybody that likes what the Saints are doing in terms of stopping the pass. They're allowing 8.8 net yards per pass attempt, which is absurd. It is far and away the highest total allowed to opposing quarterbacks, and they've forced 0 interceptions. So, I mean, there's no chance, there's no repercussions for taking chances. Teams are taking chances and gashing them. And if you can't force turnovers and you're getting gashed, that is a nightmare combination for a defense, but a dreamy matchup for these Eagles and for Bradford this week.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, stopping the pass may be a little bit generous here. It's more trying to stop the pass because they just have not had much success. And then this next guy here, one of the final two, really like this play, as you mentioned here. We talked about him before the show as well. Martavis Bryant against San Diego. One of the worst defensive units in all of football, according to every advanced site, PFF, FL, all of them, and especially on DraftKings here, where you mentioned he's less than $4,000, a little bit pricier than you'd like on FanDuel, but a big target for Michael Vick in this matchup, where maybe he does take some shots down the field, and not such a bad idea to throw it to the big target you've got that's finally making his debut here.
Yeah, I mean, Martavis Bryant was amazing last year. Obviously, it was a much smaller sample size than some of the other receivers, but he ranked third with 2.75 yards per route run last year. That's better than Odell Beckham Jr. That was behind, I believe, only Julio Jones and maybe A.J. Green. They were in the top 5. I don't remember, but, I mean, we're talking about elite company. Besting Des Bryant, besting, like I said, besting OBJ. There's no question that these guys are elite talents. Bryant needs a little bit more volume to obviously assert that he's an elite talent himself, but he's physically gifted. He's huge. He's fast. He's a matchup nightmare. And even if you figure that his snap count's going to be curbed a little bit because this is his first game played, I would 100% expect him on the field in the red zone. And he's 100% capable of making a big play, even if he has a limited snap count. If he's on some kind of pitch count this week, he should have little trouble against Chargers defense that just isn't very good.
Yeah, absolutely. So final guy we've got here, Leonard Hankerson, has emerged as the number 2 receiver now for the Atlanta Falcons. Saw Roddy White with some complaints about his role in the offense, but at 64 years old, you kind of got to temper your expectations for your role, but obviously he's not really 64. But either way, Leonard Hankerson is a guy, he was kind of a fairly highly touted prospect coming out of college and kind of emerging as Matt Ryan's number 2. And Matt Ryan's number 2 over the past few years has been a pretty profitable place to be. Roddy White was obviously in that role for quite some time. So Hankerson, especially at his depressed price tag, a guy who has big-time upside and, a decent type of floor here as well, as we've seen how many targets he's seen over the past few weeks.
Yeah, and I mean, there are definitely a lot of people to get the football to. There's Julio Jones, who's going to account for a ton of targets. Devontae Freeman carrying the ball and as a receiver is a threat. But Hankerson has home run speed, so he doesn't necessarily need a huge piece of the pie to actually pay off. And the fact that Julio Jones is going to garner so much attention is perfect for secondary options like Hankerson. So if you're using Hankerson, you're really chasing a couple long plays, but he's given those this year. Last week he caught 6 passes for 103 yards and a touchdown. He has 2 touchdowns on the year. Big yards per reception guy right now. Good size, good speed. Never quite worked out in Washington. And if you want to go down the old narrative way, he is facing his former team. Might be a little bit of extra motivation there. And but more importantly, this game is in Atlanta, and Matt Ryan has been a much better quarterback at home. Anytime you can get any piece of this Falcons high-octane offense when they're at home, you got to do it. And their team total of 28 points is big, and Washington's secondary is depleted. So not only will Julio Jones benefit from D'Angelo Hall being out, but so does Hankerson from everybody being bumped up one spot higher than they should be on the depth chart.
Yeah, and I mean, it's possible they get Tevin Coleman back this week too, so maybe that becomes more of a timeshare running back range to be seen. But this offense has looked terrifying so far, so getting cheap pieces of this seem like a great way to go. And that's going to wrap things up for the wide receiver analysis for Week 5. Find us on Twitter at DFCafe. Subscribe to this YouTube channel and check out the rest of the great content we have at dailyfantasycafe.com.